Hey guys, it's Mike here, and I just saw The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 2, Chapter 10, The Passenger, which is a ridiculously long name to say the least. So last week's episode was a strong debut to the second season, which I reviewed in this video that you can see here in the upper right corner. But now I'm going to be discussing the follow-up, which I was really looking forward to. And upon seeing this episode, the show didn't let me down, because this episode was really intense and featured a strong blend of action, humor, and horror. So let's get into the review now. So the episode starts with Mando making his way back to Mos Eisley when his speeder is suddenly destroyed and he's attacked by raiders and bandits. After defeating them in badass fashion, complete with an awesome kill using a jetpack, Mando treks through the desert and reaches the city. Once there, he tries to get more information on the Mandalorians and is given a job, where he has to bring a frog alien and her eggs to another world in order for them to hatch and save their family line from ending. However, on the way there, Mando's ship is intercepted by New Republic X-Wings, who are patrolling the area. This leads to an intense chase sequence where Mando ditches them on an ice world, but his ship crashes and he becomes trapped in the process. Din Djarin and his crew must brave the cold and survive on this hostile world. However, when the frog wanders off into the underground caverns, they come face to face with some monstrous spider creatures and have to race for their lives back to safety and hopefully find a way off the world before it's too late. So at first when this episode began, I wasn't really that into it. Things seemed a little too goofy for the first 10 minutes or so, as they introduced characters like the frog that very easily could have gone in a bad, annoying Jar Jar Binks type of situation. And we had more of the human characters speaking in weird alien languages, such as the mechanic, which I'm guessing was meant to be funny, but doesn't really work for me here like it didn't in the last episode, or in Solo: A Star Wars Story. When a droid does it like C-3PO, it's fine. After all, it makes sense that they could replicate all these sounds. But when it's people just screeching and making ridiculous sounds, it kind of takes you out of the story. So I hope that they cut down on this in future episodes, and it isn't just like a running thing we see in every one of them. However, once Mando gets on his ship and sets off for the planet, the episode becomes a lot more enjoyable and continues to ramp up in a big way. As I said before, this episode is pretty intense, beginning first off when Mando and everyone is on the way to the planet so that he can actually finish up his mission. The scene where he's actually speaking to the X-Wing pilots, who one of them is actually a cameo from Dave Filoni, who's reprising his role from the first season. You can tell that something is going wrong, especially when they switch over to a different frequency in order to speak in private. And that's when we get this really cool chase sequence. And honestly, what I'll have to say about this, and pretty much the entire episode as a whole, is that the special effects in this episode, when it comes to the CGI, and especially when it comes to the practical, are really great. You can tell that they really ramped up their budget and overall special effects in this season. But they're not doing it in the way that, say, the prequels or a lot of other movies do nowadays, where it's mostly just CGI and everything is added in post, but rather they're doing it in the way that actually works the best, where it's a blend of practical and visual effects, such as with Baby Yoda, who plays a much bigger role in this episode than last episode. Most of the time that he's on screen, they actually have a puppet there. It's not like in season 1 where he's almost always rendered in CGI, and basically not even there, but for the majority of the time he's either an animatronic or a puppet, much like the original Yoda in the original trilogy. And then when he speaks or for certain expressions and things that he does, they add CGI to make it look more realistic and more animated, which honestly I think makes everything look that much better. And I think that's the best way to use CGI, when it's being used to improve things that they've already done practically in camera and make it look even more realistic. And this season has been doing a great job with that so far, not only with Baby Yoda, but also the sets and the worlds that everything takes place on. After all, this is pretty much a TV show, even though it's made for streaming with a higher budget. So the fact that the effects in here hold up compared to most movies nowadays really goes to show you just how good they are. Especially in regards to things like the sets, like the underground ice caverns, which felt like something out of Skyrim. And of course the revisiting of the Mos Eisley Cantina, where we even met a weird alien ant creature named Dr. Mandible, who was playing cards with the mechanic character. And it only makes sense that the guy who directed this episode, Peyton Reed, also directed the Ant-Man movies, which I feel like that's probably a nod to. And then of course those spider creatures were done in a really great way, not only again invoking something like Skyrim, but also Alien with the face huggers and them coming out of the eggs. And that entire chase sequence back to the ship, which also kind of reminds me of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, where Harry and Ron have to escape from Aragog. If the effects didn't look good, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as intense or exciting. But fortunately, they did in a great way. Also, tying back into something that I had an issue with in the last episode, and I was kind of worried about at the beginning of this because we were still on Tatooine, is that I'm actually kind of glad that this planet that they crashed on wasn't Hoth, and that the Mando, when he went into the ice caverns, didn't have to fight the same kind of alien creature that Luke did, because that would have been way too fan servicey, which is something that the series I feel like needs to get away from. And fortunately, with this episode at least, they definitely seem to have cut down on a lot of the fan service from the first episode. However, like I said earlier, it does seem like it gets a little too goofy at certain points during this episode, such as the frog character, who I thought the effects for the frog character were good, but still a very strange kind of alien to bring into this episode. And a lot of this episode also revolved around Baby Yoda, who is constantly reaching into her container of eggs and taking them out and eating them. You know, it seems like at this point, Baby Yoda is just going full-on carnivore. He doesn't really even care what he eats. Eggs, babies, frogs, spiders. It doesn't even seem to make a difference to him. So I wonder if that's something that's tied into his species, or if it's just because he's supposed to be a kind of baby-esque character. The only thing I would have to say is, even though we continue to refer to him as Baby Yoda, he is 50 years old. So I wouldn't really be surprised at this point if we find out that he's pulling a Yoda from episode 5, and later on this season reveals that he can actually speak and was actually like fully cognizant the entire time. But it doesn't really seem to be leaning in that direction just yet. Another thing I didn't really like is the fact that the runtime this episode was only a little over half an hour, which is much shorter than episode 1. Now, this episode didn't necessarily need to be as long as the first episode, but the fact that they went back to the same kind of runtime that they had on average from the first season does make me a little concerned, because I'm hoping that we don't go back to this typical like 30 to 40 minutes runtime, because for most series that are on streaming services like this, such as ones that we saw on Netflix or Amazon Prime, they tend to be at least around 50 minutes to an hour plus. So I'm hoping that the season isn't reverting back to that 30 minutes plus runtime. Also, another thing is that this episode, and really the last episode, have been pretty episodic. Despite him showing up at the end of the season premiere, there was no sign of Boba Fett in this episode, nor was there any sign of Moff Gideon from the end of the last season, despite him being one of the biggest cliffhangers. And we also have yet to see Sabine Wren or Ahsoka, so I definitely would have liked to see more connective tissue there. Now, it is only 2 episodes in, but I'm hoping that they're going to have enough time for all of these important plot points this season, because I don't want them all to be rushed and shoved into a short amount of episodes. And I also don't want this entire season to build up to like the last episode where they finally introduce them again, and then there's a cliffhanger where we have to wait another year, because that would be pretty annoying, and I'm sure that fans won't be happy about that. So overall, I really enjoyed Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 2. It's a little too short and had some weird parts early on, but the rest is a strong action horror spectacle, where Mando has to survive on a desolate world. I'm not sure I'd say it's as strong as episode 1 overall, but it's definitely worth watching, and I'm looking forward to next week's episode. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.